Howdy folks, Darren Ray Fonso here talking about workers' compensation, or labor and industries as we call it here in the state of Washington. Today's topic is going to be about state medical tort laws and how they work hand in hand with state work comp laws and are being used as tools and shields by one class to wage war on the other class through our healthcare needs. In the year 2000, we had a group named ALEC businessmen, a group of ALEC businessmen, go across this nation to convince people that we were suing our doctors too much and we were suing too much and that we had all these frivolous lawsuits, they called them. And so therefore it was making the healthcare industry and costs go through the roof. So in order to get control of things, we needed to tamp down these frivolous lawsuits that people were using to sue their doctors who were harming them. In order to stop that and stop the cost of med malpractice insurance from being through the roof and the cost of healthcare being through the roof, they needed to implement these state medical tort laws, which took our right to sue our doctors away. Yes. And it's also put some caps on what we could sue for, so that even if a jury awards you $2 million, $5 million, $8 million, you will only get about $250,000. That's right. People don't understand that when they say, well, just sue, or we're a sue happy nation. No, we're not. You cannot sue your doctors for malpractice no more. Malpractice since the year 2000 is down 90% what it was back then. Our rights to sue our doctors have been taken away, and because they said it was frivolous. Yet here it is 20 years later, and we still don't have our little civil stingers to fight back with, because they said they were frivolous. So they took our little civil stingers away, is what I call them, and they weren't that much. I mean, you'd sue them for 50,000 or 30,000. They were little lawsuits. But as each one of us did that, it may not have been much, but it meant a lot to the person who was being harmed. And the more that we did that, each person would do that like little bees. We were stinging them, and they were held accountable, and they would say, okay, well, we're getting stung too much here, we won't do that to people. But instead they took our rights away to use those little frivolous stingers so that they could bring down the cost of health care and the cost of med malpractice insurance for the doctors across this nation. Well, here it is 20 years later, and the cost of health care is still through the roof. Yet we, the people, still don't have our rights back to hold doctors accountable who harm us to play cost-containing gatekeepers rather than healers in our health care. And that's why they are being able to use these doctors to harm us and workers' comp and block us from the goods and services we are entitled to. And even in SSDI as well, some of the same doctors are used as tools and shields to harm us, and we can't hold them accountable. One of the first things an American injured worker says is, well, why can't I just sue the doctor? Well, it isn't just because of the agreement and the bargain in workers' comp. It's also because the state med tort laws prohibit us from being able to hold those doctors who harm for profits accountable. This is egregious. This is harming our human rights and our ability to hold people accountable. We need our civil rights back to hold doctors who harm us accountable. And I don't care if it's a $2 harm or a $1 million harm. We need that ability to hold those people accountable. And them taking our rights away has harmed us and allowed one class to use our health care as a tool to wage war on us, on sniffs and grins. And then these men hide behind state med tort and work comp laws for their crimes against humanity. Yet if the victims try screaming out in rage and anger because we can't get justice for the harm done to us, we are subjected to criminal law. So I'm going to put a couple videos together here that other people are explaining to you, not me, what's really going on and how we're being harmed by state med tort and broken state work comp laws. I will spend 2 minutes of a video that many of the other injured workers have seen before that explains the class war basically on injured workers and how we're harming our injured workers. It was made in 2015, and nobody has addressed our issue with the needed minimum federal oversight in the last 5 years. Then I will go on to share how med tort law is involved with all this and how it's being used. Both of these state work comp laws and state med tort laws are being used for one class to wage war on the laborer's grand bargain. Go ahead and I'll present both of these videos to you, and you can draw your own conclusions.
Staying both on the job and healthy may be as vital as ever as a new investigation shows workers' compensation benefits nationwide have been cut. The moves benefit employers and insurance companies that are supposed to cover hurt workers. ProPublica and NPR conducted the joint investigation. The outlets published identical articles Wednesday morning, along with a state-by-state breakdown profiling the cuts over the past 13 years. Here are some of the investigation's key findings. Since 2003, lawmakers in 33 states have passed new laws reducing workers' comp benefits or making them tougher for employees to access. Each state varies significantly on how much you can receive, so where you get hurt matters. Many states cut off benefits after an arbitrary time limit instead of when the worker is recovered, and employers and insurance companies now have more control over medical decisions. The report was especially critical of states like Florida, which has reduced workers' comp benefits by 65% over the past 2 decades. In California, insurers can use the opinions of doctors who never actually saw a patient to reopen old cases and deny medical care. Independent medical reviewers in that state denied the recommendation of workers' doctors in 91% of cases.
Yeah, everyone thinks that workers' comp is so expensive. But in fact, we looked at the numbers and we found that employers are actually paying the lowest cost for workers' compensation insurance since the 1970s. And insurers are doing fairly well, too. In 2013, they had an 18% profit, their best year since the 1990s.
In another case highlighted Wednesday morning, ProPublica and NPR pointed out a worker who loses an arm on the job in Alabama is only entitled to a maximum of $48,000 in compensation. Just across the border in Georgia, a worker could get almost $700,000 more over his or her lifetime. ProPublica and NPR say the investigation took up much of the last year for the outlet's 2 reporters, Michael Grable and Howard Burkus. For Newsy, I'm Cliff Judy.
I'm informed that the average time from the recipient of a complaint from a doctor through the investigation to the issuance of formal discipline is 900 days. Having a patient waiting in your waiting room for 900 days would not be deemed a satisfactory experience. We need to have trust in the government. We need to have the public have trust in our process. And when something takes so long, it certainly raises the question about what's going on.
Back in December, I had a very difficult Zoom call with a couple from my district who lost a child and ultimately ended up filing a complaint with the medical board. They're victims in this, and they were never interviewed at all regarding the submittal of the complaint. Is that standard procedure? Not to interview those that have filed, and if so, why?
Well, sir, thank you for asking. No, it's not a standard procedure. Actually, the staff investigators do interview. I'm not sure what happened here.
Maybe there is a conversation we can have about increasing the number of public members so that they're at least equal or more than, given that it is a public protection board.
I think there's the concern that the medical board has to be an honest broker, that it is not captured in some way by the industry.
Folks that testified were frustrated about the limitations of liability because of MICRA and your role in MICRA.
It is hard for us to hear from people who feel like the system has not served them well or address their concern.
I think we need a deeper dive to take a look at these, because one is too many. One is too many when you lose a loved one and you do not get any resolutions. That this can't happen so easily to any others that come forward with complaints.
How many cases, and if there's an aberration, maybe because of the MICRA issue, maybe because there's some other issue with respect to this board, is there something different in terms of all, I think it's 40, I don't know how many boards, there's 41 or something boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs.
As Senator Hirschberg, laid out, it's systemic, and that we really need to take a look at that, because, mistakes happen, but people do deserve justice.
in front of the Senate Rules Committee. They are literally crucifying us about the timelines.
We took a lot of heat yesterday in the Senate Hearing Committee. Senate Rules Committee was pretty aggressive, and you know, I'm a little sensitive about it, actually.
Hi, I'm Gibson Vance, President of the American Association for Justice and a shareholder here at Beasley Allen. This week, HBO released an amazing documentary called Hot Coffee. Hot Coffee lasted about an hour and a half and will be shown several times on HBO, and it really tells the story of how corporate America and the National Chamber of Commerce set out over the last decade to destroy the civil justice system. The movie made several points. The first point was about the famous McDonald's coffee case that we've all heard about. The true story, which this show revealed, is that a 91-year-old lady by the name of Stella Liebeck was going through a drive-thru. She was a passenger in a car. They ordered from the drive-thru. They pulled over to a parking spot, and she was trying to take the coffee lid off her coffee cup where she could put cream and sugar in. Well, when she did, the coffee cup spilled in her lap and caused her third-degree burns. Actually, in the documentary, they showed the burns, and they were horrific. Well, what her attorneys found out is that the coffee was heated to 190 degrees. Well, we all learned in our science class that water or anything boils at 212. So 190 degrees is amazing. Well, as they got into the litigation, they realized that McDonald's has had over 700 complaints about their coffee being too hot and people being burned. Many people would ask, why in the world would they heat their coffee to such a high degree? Well, what we found out was they do it because technically they offer free refills. But when coffee is that hot, it takes so long to drink it that most people have left the store before they get the free refills. Also, it enabled them to use inferior coffee beans, and the heat would mask the taste of the coffee. Also, the movie talked about caps on damages and gave a very compelling true life story of a couple in Nebraska the lady had twins, and one of the twins was severely handicapped because the doctor committed medical malpractice. The child will live for many, many years, but will need a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, and will need constant care around the clock. Well, evidence was presented to the jury that that child would need a life care plan, a plan to take care of that child for the rest of its life in the range of $6 million. Well, the jury understood that. They found the doctor negligent, and they awarded a fair amount of $6 million. Sounds like a fair story, correct? Well, unfortunately, not in Nebraska. The Nebraska legislature years earlier had enacted a cap on damages, limiting the amount that a person, a victim of medical malpractice, could receive to $1.25 million. So therefore, although it was proven the child needed $6 million to take care of them, all the family received was slightly over $1 million. Completely unfair. The movie also talks about arbitration. It reveals that if you have a cell phone, if you have a credit card, if you've purchased a car in the last few years, you've probably signed a document in the thick stack of documents that you sign that invokes arbitration. Basically, that means that you have waived your Seventh Amendment right to a trial by jury. You can't go to court if you've been wronged by the credit card company or the car manufacturer, and therefore you have to arbitrate your case, which is very expensive, and the results show that 90% of the time the arbitrator sides with the corporation and against the consumer. Finally, the movie talks about something we've experienced greatly in the South, and especially in Alabama and Mississippi, where corporate America has funded many of the Supreme Court races and have allowed candidates that more often than not side with big corporations than consumers. All in all, it's a very fascinating movie. I've heard great results from those who have watched it, and I encourage you to watch it on HBO. Once again, the name of the movie is Hot Coffee. Thank you very much.
Well, there you have it, folks. I hope you learned something there. I know in my case, I tried to turn in the doctors that harmed me in my work comp care to the state med board and my HMO care to the state med board, and the state med board said that them lying to deny and trying to cheat you out of your workers' comp instead of helping you get what you were entitled to is the standard of care here in Washington State. Plus, I had a doctor in the ER stand over me with his fist as I lay down on the floor, said, "You have no right to hit me," and I tried to turn him in. And I was told that that did not arise to the level of needing to be investigated. Yet, if I had made a threat against that doctor, and that same hospital actually sent me to jail for 3 months because of a phone call I had made to them that they never did produce, where they said I threatened them, which I did not threaten them. Yet I had to take the poor man's plea, which is a whole nother story, and that's where criminal law is messed up too here besides civil law. Also, my wife was harmed in her personal care where she had a miscarriage, and the ER had took some pictures or whatever and sent her home and said the fetus should pass on its own. And then 2 days later, after somebody had reviewed the pictures, they decided that, oh no, you needed to take her to get a blood test to make sure that fetus had passed. It was a matter of life and death, and you needed to go see this doctor. So we made an appointment to see the doctor and told him we weren't sure if we had insurance or not, but it ended up we did have insurance. But that doctor refused to do the blood test because we had not insurance, and he gave her a note, said work on getting insurance, and and that your fetus has probably passed by now, and your vital signs are good, so everything is fine. I'm not giving you the blood test. Ended up, my wife ended up bleeding out 2 weeks later and needed an emergency D&C and a blood transfusion ×2 that she would otherwise not needed had he done what he was supposed to do. Nonetheless, since she didn't die, there's no lawsuit to be made there, and there's no money to be made there, even though he did harm her by intently not wanting to provide a blood test because he thought she was uninsured, and ended up we were insured, and he did get paid for denying her the blood test that we were sent there to the ER to get. I turned that into the state med board, and the state med board said that does not arise to be the level of needing to be investigated, and that is just the standard of care here in Washington State. So basically, if the harm done to you is under $250,000, it will be deemed frivolous and not worthy of investigating. That's what's going on here. And so I hope people learn about med tort and state work comp laws. Our health care our doctors and HMO care doctors will send us to OCMED doctors, all of whom seem to be conspiring and trying to cost contain rather than hook the patients up with the goods and services many of them are entitled to. And instead they throw the facts into the trash, making the victims have to dig through the trash for sometimes decades in order to get the truth that the original HMO doctors and my OCMED doctors were throwing into the trash because they no longer want to cover the non-catastrophic OJIs and workers' comp anymore, so they use their positions of power to cost contain and then are protected by state med tort and work comp laws for their crimes against humanity. Then, like I say, their victims end up getting subjected to criminal law when we scream out with rage and anger and maybe even veil threats that we can't even fulfill on. We get subjected to criminal law. This is egregious and it's oppressive. Where one man who lives a higher life standard, a better standard of living, gets to sit around with his pen and harm the others and then never be held to account. We need accountability here in America. We need accountability in our health care. I'm all for universal health care and health care being a right, but justice in that health care is just as much as important as the health care itself. Health care that for many is being denied wrongly and unjustly, and the people cannot seek justice for the harm done. It's oppressive.